The air in the living room was thick, heavy with the smell of mold, medicine, and approaching death. Outside the fogged window, Seville Inn celebrated the armistice with a distant noise, like a muffled drum in the mud. But here, in this damp gloom, there was no victory, only the final reckoning. 20 years. 20 years of silence that had become my shroud, a rusted armor eating into my bones. Every breath was a needle. I felt life draining from me like foul water, and with it the last chance for redemption slipped away. I, Vítor Caldas, Admiral of Her Majesty's Navy, retired of course, and now barely a ghost sitting in this leather chair that poorly disguised the ruin of my body, had one last duty. Not to Spain nor to the crown, but to 11 souls. 11 specters whose faces, youth, and the smell of gunpowder and saltpeter I could never forget. They appeared in my dreams not as monsters, but with the terrifying stillness of those who wait. They wait for justice. They wait for an explanation. The young journalist I had summoned, thin, nervous, with a notebook too large for his trembling hands, watched me with a mixture of ambition and dread. The rumor that old Caldas was going to reveal something about Santiago had been enough to draw him in. His name, now that I tried to recall it under the pressure of the confession, escaped me. Rojas. Ruiz. It did not matter. He was simply the scribe of my damnation. Admiral Caldas, he began, his voice a professional whisper struggling to sound confident. You claimed to have a statement regarding the Battle of Santiago. Not about the defeat itself, but about the 11 missing men from the Plutón. He hesitated, pronouncing the ship's name. It was a name that official history had conveniently forgotten. My eyes, cloudy with age and all the sleepless nights, fixed on him. The Plutón, our torpedo boat destroyer, a small, swift knife thrown against an army of American warships. The Plutón was not my ship. I was captain of the Vizcaya at the time, one of Cervera's armored cruisers. But the Plutón carried 11 men who owed me obedience and to whom I owed their lives. The difference between my rank and theirs was the difference between a mahogany coffin and a salty water grave. It is not a statement. My voice came out like dry sand, scraping my throat. I tried to take a sip of the cold cognac on the side table, but my hands were shaking too badly. The journalist offered to help, but I stopped him with a harsh gesture. I wanted to feel that weakness, that dependence on my broken body. It is a confession, and it is not about the defeat. The defeat was inevitable. The Americans had twice our iron, 3 times our firepower. We had 4 old cruisers with armor that crumbled at a good hit, and the ammunition. My God, the ammunition. Much of it was scrap, projectiles that disintegrated before hitting the target. Cervera knew. We knew. From the moment we entered Santiago Bay, we were sent to the slaughterhouse. Coughing, the effort shaking my hollow chest, I gestured for him to take note. The cough lingered, a violent phlegmy attack that left me breathless. The journalist went pale, believing the story would die right there. July, I managed to whisper, leaning on the small table. The morning, Santiago de Cuba. It is the day of my final judgment. The Bay of Santiago was a mousetrap, a narrow bottleneck flanked by fortifications that, despite their bravery, could not halt the firepower of the American fleet hovering outside, relentless as fate. Admiral Sampson, Commodore Schley. Their names still send shivers down my spine. They were hunters waiting for the prey to leave the cave. We were stuck there for weeks, humiliated, immobilized. The Cuban heat was our tormentor, and in action, our torture. Men were dying of yellow fever before they could die by the enemy. Cervera, our commander, was an honorable man, an excellent sailor, but a tormented soul. He had repeatedly telegraphed Madrid, begging, please for retreat, please for reinforcements. The response, as always, was political blindness and bravado. Finally, the dry, imperative orders came from Governor-General Blanco. Break the blockade, save the ships whatever the cost. Cervera summoned us the night before, I told the journalist, my voice filled with the bitterness of that time. I had to take a moment to drink some water, my hands now steadier, driven by memory. Cervera's face was a mask of despair and resignation. There was no hope in his eyes, only duty. We go to sacrifice, gentlemen, he told us. We will fulfill our duty, but let us not expect glory, only an honorable end. I was there, with Concas, captain of the Infanta Maria Teresa. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who knows he is going to die. I saw pure fear, but also resolve. We would be the bait, the first line of the column. The Vizcaya, my ship, would follow close behind, covering the exit. The strategy was laughable for our fleet. Escape in a naval column in broad daylight. We hoped to use the dawn mist as an ally, but the Cuban sea fog was not our friend. We had to be fast, and speed was something our old cruisers did not possess. The Maria Teresa, the flagship, led the way out of the channel. At AM, hell began. They waited. They waited until we were far enough from the channel that the shore batteries couldn't help, but close enough that we couldn't maneuver. The navigator of the USS Brooklyn sighted our smoke. The first shots were reconnaissance, but the second was a full broadside. They were fast, young man, much faster than we expected. The Brooklyn, the Oregon, the Iowa, sea giants armed to the teeth. When the Maria Teresa emerged, the first American salvo fell upon her like an iron fist. Within 5 minutes, she was burning. They didn't even need to aim precisely at our ships. We were the easiest targets in naval history. We were target practice. My ship, the Vizcaya, accelerated immediately after. The deck descended into chaos. The smoke, the deafening noise, the smell of burnt oils, scorched flesh, and superheated steel. The sensation is indescribable. It's like being inside a church bell during the toll, while that bell is on fire, and the structure is disintegrating around you. The screams of the wounded, the urgent commands of the officers, and the constant whistle of American projectiles passing overhead. My post was on the command bridge. In less than an hour, I recounted, the memory tearing at my throat. The Maria Teresa was disabled. Then the Oquendo, then my Vizcaya. We were shattered. There was no choice but to run our ships aground one after the other, the only way to prevent them from sinking in deep water, and to try to save the crew. The Vizcaya ran aground near Aserraderos Beach. I was one of the last to leave the bridge, my head ringing with the echo of explosions. The American rescue was, ironically, honorable. Captain Ulate of the Vizcaya surrendered his sword, and they returned it. An act of respect that only deepened our humiliation. But while the honor and defeat of the large cruisers were being recorded, the small torpedo boat destroyer Plutón and its sister ship, the Führer, were attempting the most desperate maneuver. They had been faster, and had managed to advance further west, but they encountered a group of smaller, more agile American ships with devastating firepower. The captain of the Plutón, Lieutenant Eduardo Diaz, was a man I held in high esteem. Young, talented, the kind of officer the Navy needed. He was in a position of extreme danger. The Plutón, being smaller and faster, was instructed to stay at the rear, with the hope that it could evade the bulk of the fleet and escape, or at least try to break the flank. Admiral Cervera, I explained, my voice becoming a low murmur that forced the journalist to lean his ear closer, had given me, personally, a supplementary order: monitor the passage of the destroyers. If the fighting became unsustainable, and the American smokescreen was too thick for coordinated retreat, I was to signal them immediately to abort the western route and run aground in Juan Gonzalez Cove, the only bay that could offer real cover for the crew. Juan Gonzalez was not far, less than a mile from where the Vizcaya would eventually ground, but it was a treacherous spot, full of reefs. Still, it was a hidden bay. The main route to the west was the route of total annihilation. When the Vizcaya was fatally struck, and I saw the fire spreading from stern to bow, I had a moment of terrifying clarity. The Plutón was still sailing. I thought of Diaz, thinking he was blinded by the battle smoke, trusting that the column of ships ahead would guide him to the open sea. I had to signal, young man. I had to give the order to turn back to Juan Gonzalez. The lives of Diaz and his 11 men depended on that flag-coded message. I grabbed the signal flag. The smoke from the Oquendo and the Vizcaya was a black wall, a thick shroud. I raised the flag, but here, at this precise point of memory, lies the brutal truth, the backbone of my shame, the second that split my life in two. My mistake. The journalist gripped his pencil so hard that the graphite snapped. In that exact moment, I continued, my throat dry. As I raised the flag, an American shell fragment struck the structure of my ship's bridge, just above our heads. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough for a piece of wood or metal to hit Lieutenant Sanchez. He fell right at my feet, moaning. I, Vítor Caldas, the captain, the commanding officer, ducked down. It was an instinctive human act of aid. I stopped my primary action for the secondary one. That second, that half-second, the sound of his fall, the smell of fresh blood on the wet wood. It was my distraction. It was enough. When I looked up again, the flag ready in my hands, the Plutón had passed. It had sailed onto the main route, the route of death. I screamed the signal. I tried to make it with the flag. I raised it, yes, young man. But my message, my signal for them to go to Juan Gonzalez, was swallowed by the gunpowder fog, by the roar of the American cannons that were shelling us. The communication was lost because of my own hesitation. The Plutón continued, straight into the fire of the USS Gloucester, the ship that was sweeping the rear. The Plutón was hit, and the explosion was visible even to me, through the dense fog. I saw the white and black smoke rise. It was set on fire, struck mercilessly. Lieutenant Diaz, understanding the fatality, did the only thing he could. He drove the ship onto the coast to try to save the survivors. They ran aground. I breathed deeply, the tremor in my lungs noticeable. But not on the safe bay I had promised them. They ran aground on a rugged, rocky stretch of coast. I, through my binoculars as I was being rescued, saw the scene. I saw Diaz order his men to abandon ship, trying to swim to shore. But the undertow was brutal, the rocks sharp. The men, the 11 to whom I should have given the message, were swallowed by the tide one by one. I saw their arms flailing in the waves. I heard the screams. Although the noise of the battle should have drowned them out, my memory hears them. I saw them. That is the truth that haunts me. I saw the agony of those, and I acted as if I had not seen it. In the confusion that followed the surrender, with my own crew wounded and my ship in ruins, no one asked me about Cervera's supplementary order. No one asked me about the failed signal. I was rescued. I was treated with honor. I was repatriated, and the defeat was covered up with stories of heroism and resistance. The official report of the Spanish Navy, the report that allowed me to ascend from captain to admiral, was clear. The Plutón fought valiantly, and the tragedy claimed sailors missing in action, victims of the battle. I kept my mouth shut, young man. I did not say that the distress order for Juan Gonzalez failed. I did not say that my mistake, my 1-second human instinct, was what condemned the who were healthy. The silence propelled me forward. It gave me promotions, it gave me honors. But silence was my private torturer. I married, I had children, I rose through the ranks. But at every banquet, every medal, every time my wife congratulated me, the image of a young body sinking into the Caribbean pierced my soul. I became a distant, cold man. My family thought it was the weight of duty, the trauma of war. It was not the trauma of war. It was the weight of the lie. Why did you keep silent, Admiral? Is the fear of losing your career worth lives? The journalist's question was direct, loaded with judgment. The remorse weighed heavily on my soul. That is hell, young man. I chose my ambition over their survival. I chose the narrative. The Spain was shattered. It needed heroes, not negligent captains. If I had told the truth, the panic, the demoralization would have been total. I would have been seen not as Captain Caldas who ran his burning ship aground, but as the man whose negligence cost 11 lives. My name would have been a national insult. I chose silence to maintain my career, to maintain my family's honor, and not to strike another blow to the morale of an already defeated nation. But silence is a slow poison. The men. Lieutenant Diaz was a family man. Corporal Martinez had asked me for permission to marry upon our return. I knew those men, and I condemned them. If they had reached Juan Gonzalez, they would have had a real chance. They would have swum to shore. They would have hidden. But no, they died among the rocks, victims of my cowardice and my ambition. From until today, I said, looking directly at the journalist, I have lived with their faces in the darkness. They drowned because of a mistake that, had I been Admiral Caldas instead of a scared man, I would have corrected. And why now, Admiral? The journalist was no longer asking, he was pleading. I smiled, a weak, empty smile. My heart, this old and tired pump, is failing. Spain has recovered, the Great War is over, and my body no longer supports me. There is no more honor to defend, only a purgatory to avoid. I want you to write the truth. I want the families of the missing of Santiago to know that they were not killed by American cannons. They were killed by the hesitation and fear of their captain. Tell them they died because of my mistake. I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, the names I had repeated every night for the past years. You will publish this. Say that Admiral Vítor Caldas, the man the nation praised for his bravery amidst the chaos, was, in truth, a coward who sacrificed his men to save his own name. The journalist put away the envelope, his eyes wide, the weight of an entire military history in his hands. This is a betrayal of your homeland, Admiral. No, I countered, feeling the cold rising up my legs, closing my eyes to the final darkness that was approaching. It is my only act of loyalty, loyalty to the dead. Now go, and don't look back. The sea is full of ghosts, and they are waiting for mine. Go.